I would like to welcome Ms. Lopa Banerjee, Chief of the Civil Society Section of the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women. Thank you so much for speaking with us at Libero International, exclusively for the first edition of Allied Human Rights Bulletin. Promotion and advancement of women's rights, as well as contribution to the work of the United Nations, is a key priority for our Human Rights Committee. Therefore, the input of UN Women is key for us as we aim to provide our liberal parliamentarians with the most internationally focused positions they can argue for in their national parliaments. Would you be able to tell me a little bit more about your role as the Chief of the Civil Society Section?
Of course. Thank you very much for having me on your program. Civil society plays a pivotal role in advancing gender equality and the empowerment of women, and has been at the forefront of developing the global rights architecture on gender. Politically and strategically, it is one of UN Women's most important constituencies. UN Women looks to civil society to achieve its strategic goal, fulfill its mandate on gender equality and women's empowerment, and together UN Women and civil society advocate for the importance of advancing policy and dialogue on women's rights, empowerment, development, peace and security. At UN Women, I lead this work, our partnership with civil society, and I lead UN Women's work in strengthening the role, contribution and influence of civil society in global intergovernmental processes and at national level in policy development and policy implementation.
Indeed, for us it's a very important moment because we do try to reach out to the civil society sections of the UN agencies we work for. So thank you once again for taking the time to speak with us today. As you know, we have, of course, among our ranks prominent liberal female leaders and parliamentarians who work tirelessly to promote women's rights policies. We have the Deputy President of Libero International, who is Premier of the Western Cape of South Africa, Helen Zille, and of course the very first female President of the UN Environmental Assembly and current Minister for the Environment of Mongolia, Dr. Oyun Sanjasuren. As we turn, of course, towards and as we look towards the next session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women and Libero International's planned participation there, what will your advice be to our liberal parliamentarians, of course, as we also try to address women's rights violations around the world and empower women?
I think it's absolutely crucial that parliamentarians work much more closely with civil society in the implementation of certainly the Beijing Platform for Action, but also in terms of commitments that governments have already made in terms of gender equality. There are two pieces over here. One is parliamentarians have the authority and have the opportunity to bring civil society into policy discussion and to be able to create spaces where civil society can influence these discussions and enable a government and hold governments accountable to commitments that they have already made. One of the most important areas is that space for civil society is shrinking in different countries and contexts. And this is an area where parliamentarians can play a really important role in strengthening the spaces, creating secure spaces, preserving spaces where civil society can work with governments and with parliamentarians on implementations of gender equality commitments of governments.
Indeed, and that's a very important point, and thank you for making that point today here. In fact, my next question leads up to this. If indeed liberal parliamentarians have such an important role of supporting civil society, what three key steps would you recommend that parliamentarians take in order to engage civil society in their own countries in eliminating bias in law and practice towards women?
Well, in terms of discrimination in law and practice, civil society is, of course, already working quite strongly in this. And I think that there would be a few key areas. I would actually say three key areas. First is governments and countries have made commitments to remove discrimination in different ways, to different degrees. Constitutions offer the legal framework to remove discrimination. And I think more attention needs to be paid to the constitutional provisions. This is where parliamentarians can work with civil society to highlight those constitutional provisions that allow for an interrogation of discrimination in law and practice. So that's number one, to be able to highlight those areas and to be able to highlight the contradictions that while the Constitution allows for it, and yet there are other laws and practice that in a sense contradict the provisions of the constitutions that allow for gender equality anyway. And it is important to bring these contradictions to light and to have an open discourse and debate on it, and to create the necessary momentum through media, through advocacy, through consultation, to be able to have the discussions that will then call for the repealing of those laws, and for parliamentarians to create those spaces with civil society to be able to have those discussions.
What active role do you think Liberal International and, of course, civil society in general can play as we seek to address the challenges of implementing the Beijing Platform for Action on Advancing Women's Rights 20 years after it was first adopted?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Civil society is one of the key actors which can support political and social mobilization and awareness-raising efforts for the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action at Beijing +20. We are at 20 years after, and implementation on the ground has been inconsistent and in some cases weak, even though we have made significant progress, but there remains a lot that needs to be done. And implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action has not been as it should be. So parliamentarians can work very strongly with civil society, first in political mobilization, to draw the necessary political attention to the deficits in the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action. At this point, political attention to Beijing +20 is not strong enough. And this is where parliamentarians, along with civil society, can refocus political attention to the implementation. Second, in terms of social mobilization and building new constituencies, to reach out, parliamentarians and civil society can jointly work to reach out to new constituencies of young men and women and youth groups and other stakeholders, to involve them in the discussions on the Beijing +20 program, to introduce them, to familiarize them with the Beijing Platform for Action as the most comprehensive framework on gender equality, and to create that necessary social momentum. Third, to work with media mobilization, really stimulate media attention to the 20th year commemoration of the Beijing Platform for Action, with the objective of focusing on implementation again and drawing attention to the gender equality agenda. And UN Women has launched a big Beijing +20 campaign. We encourage you to visit our website to join this campaign. This is the Empowering Women, Empowering Humanity Picture It campaign. There are multiple opportunities to engage, and we would really encourage parliamentarians to work with civil society to participate in this campaign and amplify its reach and its voice, so that at ground level in countries there is enough of a discussion on the fact that governments, those national governments, have agreed to this platform for action, but there remain deficits in implementation which must be addressed in this year of its commemoration.
Absolutely, and again, I think you're very right to say that it is up to parliamentarians to raise these issues in their national parliaments and shed light on the struggles of implementing the Beijing platform, and of course in supporting civil society in these efforts. And of course, as you know, we are the World Political Federation of Liberal Parties, and in that sense we have the largest network of liberal human rights parliamentarians. So I have no doubt that we will reach out and support these endeavors, which is the reason why we are calling and discussing these issues with you on this occasion. I would like to thank you very much for this interview on behalf of both our President, Dr. Julie Minoves, former Foreign Minister for Andorra and Ambassador to the United Nations, as well as the entire Bureau of Liberal International and our Human Rights Committee. And of course, we hope that this can only serve to strengthen our relationship both with your department and UN Women as we work to advance common objectives. Thank you so much once again, Lopa.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you.